Hey guys, thank you once again for checking out the DDT Method podcast. I am here back again with Big Paul Barnett, to go over everything insulin, blood sugar, glucose, muscular glycogen, everything that we touched on last time Paul was on the show. We want to do the deep dive right now to really demystify insulin and just carbs in general for you guys, so you can understand what the best application is, the best tool is. Maybe it's a fast-acting insulin, maybe it's a longer-acting insulin, maybe it's not insulin at all. But we need to approach this from a level where we understand what's going on so we can make intelligent decisions. Because as I've said 1,000 times, insulin is kind of like a gun. If you know what you're doing, safest thing on the planet. If you're an idiot, you're probably going to kill yourself or somebody else. I don't really understand how you would kill somebody else with your own insulin, but nonetheless, we're going to dive into the thing. Hey guys, I'm going to interrupt myself while I'm talking to somebody here, but I'm going to interrupt myself from the future because it's still me just interjecting a pre-recorded version of me saying something in the middle of something. I know, weird, right? I want you guys to check out the DDT Method School Group. Social media is kind of weird these days, and I keep getting shut down or banned or temporarily suspended or whatever anytime I mention anything like a protocol or a milligram. So in the DDT Method School Group, I'll be doing 2 weekly content drops where I'll be giving exclusive protocols and full breakdowns and profiles of all your favorite peptides and PEDs. This is the DDT Method School Group. Check it out in the link below. Paul, how you been, man? Like, how's everything going before we get to the brass tacks of this?
Good, man. Just getting back into training, trying to get back into the bodybuilding lifestyle after this is the longest break I've taken in 10 years after the surgery. So I really couldn't train for about 6 months. I mean, I still got in the gym and did my rehab work and stuff, but it's kind of a mind fuck not being able to train. I was surprised how much size I held on to, though. It's wild once, just running TRT, and it was probably good I took a break, man, because I just ran 200 mgs a test and just a little GH here and there for the last basically 8 months, man. So it was probably a much needed break after I've been stupid with shit over the last decade. So amazing thing happened, man. My blood work got better. Imagine that.
Crazy, right?
It's funny how that fucking works. Yeah, no, I don't know. I mean, I stayed around 250-ish, 240, 250-ish, and I'm definitely not a, competitive 250, but I still hung on to a fair amount of tissue. I think it's interesting after you've been training for a long time. It's not that hard to hang on. Now, if you want to progress, you gotta get aggressive.
Right.
That's why I think a lot of times, like a lot of the old pros will tell half truths. Well, you took 300 mgs of testosterone, and I'm like, yeah, that's what you did when you were already 260 pounds and you just needed to maintain it. That's not what you did to get there.
It's like
Let's be
safer
honest about
use, but now, not before.
now.
Safer use
Now.
currently.
Now, there are genetic outliers that probably can get big on fucking nothing. We've all heard the stories about, Ronnie Coleman and Phil Heath, and if you believe Lee Priest, but he claims to have never taken much. But, it is possible, I guess. But for 99.9% of us, that's not how it works.
Yeah, I mean, they're all out there. We've all seen just the random guy working construction or went to high school with the random kid that had like a 12-pack and like striations and they didn't know what working out was. They probably never even got into bodybuilding, but had they done so and taken a few milligrams of whatever and applied a few things here and there, they very well could have been like the next, calling of Ronnie Coleman or whatnot. The genetic freaks are out there. It's just they don't all make their way over to the sport. Food-wise, what have you been doing? Have you been following like a structured plan to help out with that, or maybe like a relaxed plan?
Nah, dude. I'll be honest with you, man. I'm like all in or all out. It's just how I am with shit. I'm either 100% in or I'm not doing anything. So I didn't weigh or measure anything for the last 7 months. I would say for the most part, I ate clean. I don't know, 2-3 cheat meals a week is kind of what I was doing. But right, but I have the problem I have, dude, when I get off plan is I don't eat enough. I'll get down to eating I was down to eating like 2-3 times a day there for a while. It's probably the GLP-1 too. They probably didn't help things.
Right. So did you stay on like a background dose of retatrutide and whatnot, or?
I'm diabetic, so which will lead into the the insulin discussion. I have been for quite some time. I'm type 1.5. Ding ding for those of you who are playing Big Paul bingo, because I get people laugh when I talk about being diabetic. But I am prescribed Mounjaro. So I've been flip-flopping back and forth between tirzepatide and the retatrutide to see which works better. They're very different. I will say the appetite suppression is much more pronounced with tirzepatide
Mm-hmm.
than it is with retatrutide, but I think retatrutide overall, as far as health markers, side effects, etc., seems to be the better of the two.
Have you considered any sort of like combo therapy, like smaller doses of each one? Because I've seen a few people messing with that.
No, I haven't fucked with that. I don't know why you would. I mean, it's the GLP-1's a GLP-1. The GIP is a GIP, and then the only thing really difference between the tirzepatide and the retatrutide is the addition of the glucagon agonist. So I don't know what benefit there would be to doing that.
Yeah, you kind of end up stacking similar modalities. Like I know cagrilintide is used a lot because that's a different pathway.
Well,
and
it's
whatnot.
appetite suppression.
Yeah.
And there's some debate on whether how effective that is too. So some people say it's great, some people say it's not. But the appetite suppression seems to also be somewhat genetic too. Like I get really like even on the smallest dose, I can't fucking eat. But I already struggle with my appetite as is. It's really weird, man. It was like really fucking weird. Like I still would want to eat junk food. Like I could hammer down McDonald's and candy, no problem. But the thought of eating protein just made me want to throw up, man. Like I couldn't eat more than a couple ounces of protein. The thought of drinking water, I was having a hard. I realized like it'd be like 2 PM, and I'm like, wait a minute, I haven't fucking drank any water today. I wasn't getting thirsty.
See, I'm curious how many people are experiencing that, because we've all heard like the whole thing about food noise and cravings, and a lot of the people, especially the people that are kind of pushing these products, are saying like, oh, it eliminates all of your cravings for bad food. But then you kind of hear anecdotal reports, and I experienced this myself. It gets to the point where it's just like, you know, your chicken and rice doesn't look that appetizing, but it's like, I can go eat some cheesecake. I mean, you might feel a little sick if you force feed it, but you're still like more prone to eat the crappy food, at least in my experience as well. So I'm interested how many people actually are encountering that, because the food noise thing, it's weird. It's not quite what people make it out to be. I mean, I love GLPs, don't get me wrong, but I do think that there's a lot more that we need to learn about that. Would you consider these almost like the first line of defense for somebody that wants to get into manipulation of blood sugar if they're not a diabetic and they just want to like attack body comp? Or is it a little step like before that, is like a GDA kind of the first step into it? Where would you start somebody?
It depends, man. Like there are some outside benefits of the GLP-1s more than just the insulin sensitivity aspect of it. You'll see, like I know, especially with retatrutide, I noticed the pronounced improvement in lipids, which are a big problem when you're on PEDs. I saw an improvement in liver markers. I saw a reduction in C-reactive protein. I mean, all these things that get elevated. So I could maybe get behind an argument of just running a low dose of it just for those benefits alone, assuming you can eat. If you can't eat, it doesn't fucking. I recently dropped the GLP-1, and I'm going to do it temporarily just so I can put some size back on, because I couldn't fucking eat, man. Like I literally couldn't. Like I couldn't make it past 200 grams of protein, and that was where I was tapping out, even on the lowest dose, 1 milligram of Reta or 2.5. So I don't know if it would be my first line of defense. Look, if you're obese, you have insulin sensitivity issues, that needs to be addressed before you consider insulin, because throwing more insulin at a problem when you already have reduced insulin sensitivity is just going to make the insulin sensitivity even worse. More insulin makes insulin sensitivity worse. That's always the catch-22 of when we use insulin, and I'll dig into that a little bit more. So I would say first order of business is to make sure that insulin sensitivity is in a good spot where you can effectively use the insulin. Now, a GLP-1 is a potent tool for that. I mean, they work fantastic. I mean, my A1C was, and it hasn't been this way in a long time. I got my A1C back down to like 5.4, 5.5. And the lowest I could get it with just metformin and eating a strict diet was in the low 6s before. So, and that was just with 1 milligram or 2.5 of tirzepatide. I was able to. So clearly, it has an impact on things. Improved pancreatic function, improved insulin sensitivity, improve glucose metabolism in the liver if you're using retatrutide because of the glucagon agonist action that we have. So it could be, I wouldn't say that it would be my first option. Depending on the person, I would say really probably the easiest and quickest thing you can do to improve insulin sensitivity is just not be fat, lose some weight. Berberine is an effective tool, assuming that your stomach can tolerate it. Metformin, I think metformin might become obsolete with the addition of retatrutide, although it seems like there's some synergy between metformin and retatrutide. The two run independently don't work that well. The two together seem to really be effective at improving insulin sensitivity and glucose disposal. Although I would think the glucagon agonist in the retatrutide has a similar mechanism of action as probably better than metformin, but those two can be used together. But I would say, look, I would say first and foremost, and this is my advice for everybody, before you try to put on size, get lean first. Just get yourself shredded. So commit to getting yourself down to single digit body fat. You don't have to get contest lean, but get down to like 8% body fat, let's say. Go ahead.
So once somebody does get down to that like low body fat, and let's assume they're using some sort of PEDs here, because for the most part, our audience is going to be people that are trying to utilize things better, thus implying they're already using stuff. So let's say they've got themselves down to a body fat percentage that it's like, okay, this is a good place to start bulking from. A lot of people make the mistake of just saying like, all right, it's time for insulin. They start insulin, then they try and match the carbs to the insulin. We know that's not the way to go about it. What's your process for driving up carbohydrate intake? So I know personally, I like to make sure that I'm trying to increase training volume to create more of a need for carbs. I bring the carbs up as much as humanly possible. Then I try to deploy the insulin at the point that I think more carbohydrates just can't be handled without it. What's your approach to it? And do you utilize anything first, like your metformins, Jardiances, GDAs? Or is it one of those things where we're just going to play ball and see where the individual handles carbs? And how do you like to titrate them up?
Exactly the way you said it. When you come out of a cut, a lot of times your insulin sensitivity is so good, your pancreatic function is so good, especially if you've been using a GLP-1. If you throw insulin, and a lot of times you're just going to go hypo, is what I've seen. So usually coming out of a cut, I get aggressive with the carbs. I see what we can get away with, and then titrate based off of that. I would be very cautious with fat intake. I think a lot of times guys coming out of diets tend to binge eat. So the reason why I get a little more aggressive with the food out of the gate is to prevent them from binge eating. I would rather you eat chicken and rice than lose your shit and go to Cheesecake Factory.
Right.
That's sort of my thought process. Now there's a fine line to walk. Water retention is always an issue when you reintroduce carbs. And after a while that aldosterone seems to regulate and that balances out. But a lot of times just coming out of a hard cut, just the food increase alone is plenty. Maybe using a little berberine. Berberine would probably be my first line of defense. If you used a GLP-1 to cut, I would just run a baseline dose of the GLP-1 on that rebound phase. It's 2.5 milligrams of tirzepatide, if that's what your weapon of choice is, or 1 milligram of Reta. I would leave that in place coming out of a cut, and then just see how long you can ride that, and then save that tool for when you need it. And eventually you mentioned it, you're going to hit the wall where you hit a limit of what you can handle, and you'll see glucose levels start to rise. I think it's important to really track your glucose levels. And in fact, I would encourage people, I know some people say it's overcomplication, but it's might be worthwhile to grab a glucose CGM and monitor yourself and see how you're responding to these carbohydrates. You don't need to run it long term, but I'd say for a couple months, spend a couple $100, see how your body's responding to the carbohydrates, what your response to them looks like, what it looks like during training. Are you getting close to going hypo when you're training? Is your glucose level staying higher? And then when we hit a point where insulin is necessary, what I like to do is just run it on my high carbohydrate days with carb cycling. So we're limiting our exposure. We keep it to the high carbohydrate days. Only on those high carbohydrate days, we keep fats very low, because if you are in a caloric surplus, you're running insulin. which is going to promote nutrient storage, and you have an excess calories coming from both carbohydrates and fat, what's going to happen to those fats? They're just going to
Mhm.
get stored as body fat.
Yep.
So, but we do need some fats in our diet. So we strategically manipulate macros on various days where, some days we'll push the fats a little bit higher, pull the carbohydrates down. We wouldn't use insulin on those days. And then 1 to 2 days a week, maybe in an outlier case, 3 days a week, I'll have a high carbohydrate day where we push the carbs aggressively high, upwards of 1,000 milligrams of um, carbohydrates to, and then use insulin to push those when we're in an off-season phase. And then I'll run the insulin on those high carbohydrate days. So we're limiting exposure. We're not increasing insulin resistance. We're keeping fats low, so we're not promoting adipose accumulation. And then that way we are on that day, in theory, we can be in a surplus if we're sufficiently glycogen depleted and force glycogen synthesis on that day. And it does seem to be paired with higher volume training. There is some super compensation that happens with the higher volume training with insulin and with high carbohydrate intake. You can see the coaches that do this type of approach. I mean, Milo Sarchev would be an example. I know Hani Rambod, I believe, does something similar with his FST7 training. And you can read between the lines when you see guys pushing carbs, more than 500-600 grams. You know what's going on,
Mhm.
right? They're probably using insulin to deal with those carbohydrates, but there does seem to be some sort of super compensation effect that happens over time where you're able to synthesize more glycogen and have that bigger, fuller, rounder look. And we know that the muscle substrate is depending on what study you look at most 30% protein structures, probably more like 20 to 25%. So that other 70 to 80% is the other shit. A lot of it's glycogen and
Mhm.
water
Mhm.
and amino acids. So in when we're taking PEDs, we're promoting nitrogen retention. When we're doing higher volume training, during training, GLUT4 transport is increased. So, with logic to reason, and then insulin and carbohydrates are going to further enhance that effect. So, it would make sense that there probably is some sort of supercompensation in glycogen synthesis during that time period. And then once your glycogen's topped off, you're probably good for a couple days. You don't need to run it again. And I think that's where guys get fat. Once glycogen's topped off, then you end up in a situation where your body will just start converting those excess carbohydrates to lipids, even with insulin in play, even with your fats low. And you'll see it on blood panels. You'll see guys, and this is either insulin resistance or they just push the carbs too far when triglycerides start to get high. It's usually an indicator that there's too much, uh, or there's some sort of metabolic disorder, or there's too much carbohydrates being used in the diet.
Now, you mentioned that GLUT4 translocation. I recently did a video on that in my school group where I just kind of break down the more complex stuff or at least try to make it digestible. So that's basically opening up kind of like the door on the muscle cell to pull in more glycogen.
Yeah.
Can you explain how that affects the insulin use and makes maybe sets you up to get more bang for your buck out of the insulin? And does that make insulin around a workout more potent, or are you able to handle more than you would be, let's say, pre-workout or in between sessions, like during other meals? How do we like to time it, and how much do you consider GLUT4 as a general consideration for when you dose the insulin?
Well, we don't know for sure. There's no science on this stuff. So all we have is anecdote. We can look at the guys that have done it this way. And clearly it fucking works.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you can look at it like, and this, the whole, insulin does seem to enhance GLUT4 transport. There is some science on that, but and you talk to the science nerd crowd, and they'll say, well, there's no additional benefit to glycogen synthesis during a workout, blah 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 blah. I like anecdote says otherwise, man. I mean, you can look at hundreds and hundreds of, maybe even thousands, I don't know, professional bodybuilders that have done this style of higher volume training. I mean, Milos Sarchev likes to do his giant sets. Hani Rambod does the FST7, which is some form of the, you do 10, what is it, 7 sets of 10 or whatever it is.
Something like that. It's a bunch of volume. So
Yeah, it's a bunch of volume. Essentially, it's just a fancy name for doing more volume. And the longer you are lifting weights, the more longer that window for GLUT4 transport is going to be open. And it does seem, just anecdotally speaking, when you throw carbohydrates at it, when you throw insulin at it, it seems to further enhance that effect. And you can test it out yourself, and you take some fucking insulin and eat some carbs and do a high volume workout. The as long as your insulin sensitivity is in a good place, the pumps are seam splitting, and then you're full as fuck for a couple days afterwards.
Now, in adding insulin in, where do you like, because I know the dosages are going to be a little bit more subjective. That has to do with the individual, how many carbs you have them eating and whatnot. Where's the first place that you'll put it on a high carb day? And then if you're going to increase it from there, are you increasing the frequency of the administration, and where are you placing it at that point in time?
What I like to do, Drew, and this is different than what you hear every other coach talk about, and I've thought extensively about this. Like there's this notion from a lot of people to use Lantus, or a longer acting insulin, a basal insulin. And if you're diabetic, you understand how a basal insulin is designed to be used. It is not meant to deal with meals. Basal insulin is to replace that background insulin that's present at all times. I have pancreatic insufficiency where my body just does not make enough insulin. And what happens over a period of time, or I will sporadically make insulin, and what'll happen even when I'm not eating food, like to say if I'm even sometimes my blood sugar will get high when I'm fasting. What happens if you don't have that background insulin present? The glucose levels will rise over a period of time, and you end up with high fasting glucose levels. And it can be from pancreatic insufficiency, or it can be from insulin resistance, both, where your body just can't push enough insulin to shuttle those carbs, or it's, you have, the insulin's not working basically, because the receptor is not accepting the insulin that's present. So, and I think this is a mistake that I see a lot of guys do. They take a bunch of GH, they end up making themselves insulin resistant. Then they notice that their fasting glucose levels are higher, and they're like, "Oh, I'm going to take Lantus to deal with this." But what really is going on there, they're masking the underlying insulin resistance and using that insulin to cover up. They're just throwing more insulin at insulin resistance, and then it's going to further compound the problem and make them even more insulin resistant. And I think that's a huge mistake that I'll see guys like, look, my fasting glucose levels are great now that I've used Lantus, throughout the week. And I'm like, well, bro, you got a fucking problem going on if you're having to use Lantus to get your fasting glucose levels down. You're either insulin resistant or you have pancreatic insufficiency. Either way, you're in some sort of diabetic or pre-diabetic state. So that to me is the completely wrong approach. Not only that, when we think about it, like a long-acting insulin like Lantus, say I take 20 units. That's what I'm prescribed by my endocrinologist to take. I take 20 units a day. It's a 24-hour insulin. It doesn't exactly last 20 hours, but let's say it lasts 20 hours. That's 1 unit per hour. Now, what the fuck is that going to do when you eat a meal? Nothing, right? It's not going to help anything. It's really just to replace that background insulin to bring your levels between meals down, when your fasting levels back down. That's really what it was designed for. And how bros, for the most part, use it is masking an underlying problem. Now, I've heard the argument that you can take it to prevent pancreatic burnout. That's a different argument altogether. Maybe that is true. Maybe it's not. It seems to be a bit pseudoscience-y. We don't know for sure. But what we do know is when you throw more insulin at insulin resistance, you're just making the insulin resistance even worse. And you'll see it. Guys will have to start using more and more and more and more and more and more. I've heard of pros using hundreds of units of Lantus a day just to get there's a big fucking problem going on if you have to do that.
It just seems like the whole thought process of I'm going to give my pancreas a break by applying a long-acting insulin, without the thought process of I'm now adding more insulin that has to be taken in by these cells. Like you just said, I mean, it's a recipe of destroying insulin sensitivity at the purpose of sparing your pancreas the burden. So it's kind of causing one problem by attempting to fix another. Do you think there's any application for Lantus or long-acting insulin in physique or performance enhancement outside of somebody that needs it medically?
I mean, maybe you could make an argument to have it in the background on a high day just to help between meals. That I could get that, but if you're having to run it 7 days a week just to keep your glucose levels in line, you got a fucking problem, a serious problem. You're on a freight train that being diabetic, or you're already diabetic.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say if that's the case now, considering that this is an area where I would say, all right, it's all hands on deck. Let's run some metformin and a GLP-1 and get on a diet and see if we can get that fixed. And most of the times that's, the thing with insulin resistance, unless it's been years and years and years of mismanagement and neglect, you can usually correct it pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Within a couple months, you can usually correct insulin resistance if you're intelligent about it. So I would say, that if you're in a situation where your fasting glucose levels are high, I would say I would probably get a CGM and start monitoring things 24/7. It's possible it could be just something silly like the dawn effect or Samogi effect. Sometimes you'll go hypo in the middle of the night and your glucose levels will rise in the morning. So you got to think the blood finger prick is just a snapshot in time that doesn't give you any data on what's going on throughout the day. But I would say I would start there first. If your fasting glucose levels are high, this would be my troubleshooting process. We need to figure out why. And the next step for figuring out why would probably be to get a CGM and to check your A1C.
Mm-hmm.
And see what's going on there. If your A1C is high, we might want to get a fasting insulin test done to see, or maybe a C-peptide test done to see if you do have pancreatic insufficiency. And I have noticed more and more bodybuilders have that as they age, and I think that's probably just from pounding food over decades, and then you just wear your pancreas out over time.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the argument that you hear people make for using Lantus. And maybe there is something to it. I don't fucking know. But to me, it doesn't make sense if you're given the current tools that we have available. It probably make more sense to run a GLP-1 first.
Right. Now, outside of the fringe situations where maybe somebody can get away with a little bit of Lantus in the background for high days, how do you go about structuring insulin protocols without it? So are we adding multiple doses of a fast acting? Are those
Yes.
pre and post workout? What about if they need more? Are we doing post workout? Like, what are your thought processes behind those?
Yeah, I prefer rapid insulin because we have more control over dosing. Now, and I think this is why most coaches just tell people to use Lantus. They don't understand the mechanisms of action and how the insulin actually works. And they know that Lantus, you probably aren't going to die from taking Lantus. You can fuck up pretty bad. I mean, and I'm not suggesting anybody do this, but there was a thing I saw where a guy tried to commit suicide with Lantus, and he took thousands of units of Lantus and didn't die. I'm not saying go out and do that.
No,
but,
God, no.
That's not medical advice, people, but you can look it up. I think it was in Thailand this happened, but Lantus is pretty safe. It's pretty hard to fuck up Lantus.
Yeah.
And I think that's why, bros want to take insulin. It's like, let's take, I don't understand how it works. So I'm going to tell them to take this one that's not going to kill them.
Right.
And I think that's how it goes. But the way I look at it, Lantus was not designed to deal with meals. We want to increase GLUT4 transport around the workout window. We want to force glycogen synthesis. And if you look at the way insulin is used in diabetics, Lantus is to replace the background, or what's the other one? Tresiba, I think. There are a couple different ones. Insulin glargine. I probably slaughtered the name, but anyway, you get what I'm saying. But there's rapid, medium, and there's also ultra rapid now. There's a new one out. God, I can't remember what it's called. I don't know. Anyway, there's an ultra rapid one out now. The rapid acting insulins are meant to deal with mealtime and diabetics. So like if you're eating a big bolus of food and your blood sugar goes up, the rapid acting insulin's meant to deal with that. So we have more precision and more control with the rapid acting insulin to deal with mealtime boluses. So what I do is I run it throughout the high day. We can look at the pharmacokinetics of, say, Humalog. We'll just use that, or Novolog. They're pretty much similar in action. I think Novolog might be or Humalog might be a little faster. I don't recall, but they're similar. Within 15 minutes, they're acting, and they peak, and then they're in your system for about 3 to 5 hours, something like that. So what I like to do on a high day is I will run, assuming I'm eating 6 meals, I will run a rapid acting insulin at meals 1, 3, and 5. I don't worry about the workout window. I'm going to be covered whenever I work out. If I work out after meal 4, there's still going to be insulin present in my system. That way I'm covered throughout the whole day. I want to make sure that I'm checking my insulin before, or checking my blood sugar before I administer the insulin. And my rule of thumb is if you're below 80 pre-meal, don't take it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You're already there. If you're above 80, you can take it. And the reason why I don't do every meal is because how frequently bodybuilders eat. These insulins are designed, and maybe the ultra rapid ones, I have not messed with the ultra rapid ones, might be even more precise because they're in and out quicker. But because the Novolog or Humalog is still going to be somewhat present up to 5 hours, when you eat your next meal in 2.5 hours, if you're eating 6 meals, all of us are eating every 2.5 hours, that, if you took 5 units of Humalog, 2 or 3 of that's still present. And I see guys take another 5 and they're like, oh shit, I went hypo. Why did I go hypo? I'm like, because you still had some of the previous insulin present.
Mm-hmm.
It was still present. So it compounds. So that way we know if we do every other meal that it's cleared. We get the performance enhancing effect of it. When we do it on a high carbohydrate day, we know the risk of going hypo is probably lower than it would be on a non-high day. I also get a little scared guys doing it around the workout window sometimes because I don't think dudes eat enough carbs and they underestimate how how quickly the insulin act. You could in theory run it every day and run it pre-workout. That and they're it's pretty sure how Milos runs it with his guys. But my thought process is we have more time of exposure to it across the if we have insulin present 12 hours throughout a single day. That's essentially the same as having it present for 3 days if we were just administering it pre and post workout. And pre and post workout might be too close together.
Right.
And then also, like, if you work out at the end of the day, like, man, you're taking a rapid acting insulin with your last meal before you go to bed, you could go hypo in your sleep and fucking die because you have
Mm-hmm.
that doubling effect, and it's still going to be it's still going to be present after that meal is gone. So I do not like to use a rapid acting insulin any closer than 2 meals to bedtime.
No, I do the same thing, and it's one of those situations where if we're administering, I can't talk today apparently, if we're going to use a second dose of insulin after the post-workout dose, I always have to have that conversation like, hey, what time are you training? Let's not do it at this time because for this reason, I don't want you to take it at 10 o'clock and then go to bed at 11 and then wake up and then, something's happened or God forbid you don't wake up. So even though it might be even a small amount, we have to also look at things like you're saying about the dosages compounding if they're too close together situationally. Like these are the little things that people have to pay attention to. I want to back up a little bit because you mentioned growth hormone and people using things like Lantus to kind of band-aid or mask issues. On the other side of that coin, what are some of the positive interactions between growth hormone and insulin? Because we all hear about the synergy, but what is that synergy? Like, what is
Well,
the positive?
they're counter-regulatory hormones, right? I mean, the insulin is going to promote storage. HGH is going to promote liberation, so it promotes lipolysis. That's why you get high blood sugar when you go on HGH, is because it shifts you towards lipolysis. You're burning fat, and so it's a temporary effect. You're going to see a rise in glucose levels because your body is burning fat during the period of time. 6 to 8 hours or whatever it is that the HGH is present. That's why we want to try to keep our carbohydrates away from HGH so we're not further exacerbating high glucose levels.
Mm-hmm.
I would say in the off season, I would only run my GH at night when you're close to being fasted as you possibly can. I would not run it throughout the day. I know there's this old school mentality that you take it pre-workout with your insulin, and then it's basically like trying to row upstream,
Right.
row in 2 directions at once. And what that does ultimately is create more insulin resistance. And really what we're trying to leverage from the GH is the increased IGF-1 from the GH administration, which if you look at studies on it, it stays elevated for up to 72 hours.
Mm-hmm.
Now, More insulin, more carbohydrates, more GLUT4 transport, all that's going to set up a metabolic cascade where you're going to have increased mTOR, lowered MPK. More insulin leads to increased IGF-1 downstream. So, and we'll see this often. Like I'll see guys like they're on contest prep and they're like, I'm taking GH and doing all this stuff, but why are my IGF-1 levels in the shitter? I'm like, well, bro, you're not eating fucking carbs. That's why.
Mm-hmm.
No carbs, no insulin, and insulin's necessary to increase IGF-1. There's a bunch of other, we could argue a little bit of estrogen and some other things that increased IGF-1. So I would say I would keep my insulin and growth hormone away from each other personally, because I think when you really all you're doing is masking the how it affects glucose disposal, and you're creating a situation where you might have more insulin resistance.
So we want to take advantage of the IGF-1 and that subsequent conversion, but just separating them to different sides of the day, pretty much.
Yeah, and think about it this way: the lipotic effect of GH, from what I recall, lasts somewhere up to 6 to 8 hours. It takes about 2 hours for the GH to peak. That's why I laugh when guys say they take their GH in the morning and do their fasted cardio, and I'm like, well, bro, it doesn't peak for 2 hours, so.
Right.
So it's not really doing anything. If you wanted to do that, you would get up 2 hours before you do your cardio, or just take your GH late at night, and then some of it's still going to be present in the morning. Now, on contest prep, when I'm not eating carbs throughout the day, I will split up my dose of GH because I want to leverage more fat burning, right?
Right.
So in a situation then that would make sense. But like in an off-season setting where we're trying to protect ourselves from insulin resistance, where we only really care about IGF-1 elevation, and we know that IGF-1 elevation is going to last for a longer period of time. In my mind, I'm not a biochemist, but in my mind, it would make more sense to keep those two separate. Those are two counter-regulatory pathways.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Now, in terms of other things that may or may not have synergy with the insulin that we're using, I remember old school back in the day on the boards, people would talk about all these massive like peri-workout concoctions of all their amino acids and their creatines and everything. And the whole idea was when you take your Humalog, it's just going to shove all these into the muscle and you're going to get even better application of these basic, sports nutrition products that we are all using and a lot of us still use. Is there any legitimacy to that, or is there any way to store other things like your carnitines or your essential aminos with insulin, or is that just something that's been kind of like overbroad?
Well, I mean, insulin's going to promote amino acid uptake too. I mean, it does both. It's going to promote amino acid uptake, nitrogen retention, additional glucose uptake. Now, there's a question of whether or not, most likely the intra-workout drink that you're using during your workout is just going to replace the glucose that you're actually burning, lifting, and protecting your glycogen.
Mm-hmm.
More than likely, I'm just guessing. We just don't know for sure. It's not like there's fucking studies on this, but clearly there's something that's happening with the guys that are doing this. I mean, you can see. I know Milos, that's his approach. I mean, clearly there's you see his guys, he blows fucking dudes up. They get huge. So clearly there's some sort of effect going on there. Whether or not that's increased nitrogen retention, whether that's increased amino acid uptake, also part of nitrogen retention, or glycogen synthesis, whatever. We just don't know for 100% sure. But you are, keep in mind, you are burning through glucose as you're lifting weight. So I think the intra-workout shake is more protective of your glycogen. We're sparing that glycogen from being used during the workout. Would be my guess. I don't know though for sure. It's possible that we're synthesizing if you hammer it enough with enough, and and I know like his hyperemia, I think he calls it, system or whatever it is. The idea is that you are pushing more blood around and all that stuff. I really think it's the increased GLUT4 transport is what's causing the effect. I don't know that it's so much blood flow. Maybe it is. Who the fuck knows?
Mm-hmm.
But there's not like there's studies on this shit. We just have anecdote to go on. But there certainly seems to be some sort of effect that happens.
I love that we're in an era where everybody questions studies automatically, and half of the studies that they want will never be done ethically by human beings. It's just not an option.
Well, I've had these arguments and no disrespect to anybody, but like I hear people talk about how it's the pump or volume has no effect on hypertrophy, and I'm like, yeah, maybe on muscle protein synthesis, but And the studies seem to indicate that. But what about the sarcoplasm? I mean, like, like there's clearly something going on. You could say that sarcoplasmic hypertrophy is not a thing, but we have thousands and thousands and thousands of anecdotes at this time that say otherwise.
And I love when a study comes out and tells me that something does something. Like, that's great, because then I know, hey, this is probably going to elicit whatever result when I do this thing. But that doesn't mean everything that doesn't have that piece of paper is completely redundant or doesn't work. But for whatever reason, we live in the era of, if it hasn't been studied at university and concluded, then it's complete horseshit. And it's like, well, then 80% of your life is horseshit then, because it hasn't been concluded by a university study. But
Well, you
such
can
is
just
such is
look.
life.
If you want real life examples, you can just look at the guys that have made transitions from powerlifting to bodybuilding.
Mm-hmm.
And they start training like a bodybuilder. They start eating like a bodybuilder. They start doing a little more volume. They start using higher rep ranges. They start eating more carbohydrates. They start taking insulin. Their physiques completely change. They were probably stronger when they were powerlifters,
Mm-hmm.
right? An example, Justin Harris, I had him on this week. We were talking about his client, John Rivas, who was a world-class. I mean, I think he had a world record for deadlift in his weight class. And dude put on 50 pounds and got his pro card, but he's not as strong as he was when he was a powerlifter. But what changed?
Mm-hmm.
Right? It has to be all for the most part, sarcoplasmic addition, because the contractile tissue was there before, because he was able to generate the force to lift heavy. So something changed.
Yep, exactly. There's that other guy too. I forget his real name. He's PH Deadlift or something like that.
Oh, yeah. He used to work out of my gym. God damn it. I forget his name. Yeah, another one of Justin's guys.
But crazy transformation, like ridiculous, like pounds upon pounds of muscle, just switching modalities from powerlifting to bodybuilding. And
Ben
again,
Pollock. Yeah,
yes, yep, that's
yeah,
it.
Ben used to work out at my gym, so I used to see him around. Yeah. I mean, another one of Justin's guys, and Justin's approach is the carb cycling approach, pushing insulin and high carbohydrates on those high days. And he's done it over and over and over and over again with these guys, where he takes these guys, these strong guys, and turns them into just fucking monsters on the bodybuilding stage. Now, maybe you can make the argument that early on in your training that maybe you should be more focused on strength, build that substrate up, and then as you get bigger, then maybe make a transition to a little more volume, push food a little bit more. But there are guys that are big and bubbly that are just never were that strong, like Phil Heath would be an example. I mean, Jay Cutler's been talking. I don't know if he's clapping back at Dorian Yates or what he's doing, but Jay Cutler's talking about how he never trained to failure. He did a lot of volume and yeah, never lifted that heavy.
Yep. The anecdotal information is out there, and it's sad that some people want to ignore all that. But touching on insulin again, just to kind of close that, I just want to go over the fact that it's one of these things that the information is out there, but we still have to remember everybody's N of one, and different people will react slightly differently in different scenarios. So I think this has been a hell of a deep dive onto insulin, which can basically point somebody in the right direction as to how to continue their research if they want to begin to look into applying it. I do recommend, like, I don't know, Paul, if you're taking clients right now, but calling somebody like Paul, contacting somebody to kind of guide you through it that knows their stuff.
I have some detailed instructions in my anabolic Z course about insulin administration. I will tell this, and this is a mistake, but just a forewarning before you go on. I hear guys talk about the 1 unit per 10 grams of carbs. That's sort of like the old prescribed ratio. Don't start off there.
No.
That's for diabetics. These are fat people that are insulin resistant. And also, if you're taking a GLP-1, your insulin sensitivity is going to be even that much better. I mean, I usually tell guys to start off at, really low. I mean, like just a couple units and see how you respond.
I was going to say, yeah, before we kind of pivot to general PEDs, how do you like to navigate that? So you start them, like you said, like 1 or 2 units. How do you titrate that up? Is it over a long time, a small amount of time? Like, how do you determine what somebody's like optimal dosage is?
I usually will say, like, look, if you're doing 100 grams of carbs, I'd probably start off at something like 3 or 4 units.
Mhm.
Like 1 per 20, or even a little more conservative, 1 per 25, a little more conservative than that. And then check your glucose again before you eat your next meal and see where you're at. And if you're super low, like if you're down in the 70s, you're like on the cusp of going hypo. I mean, some people consider that hypo. You know that your insulin sensitivity is really good and you don't need any more than that. But if your glucose levels are still high, I mean, a diabetic would never take insulin without checking their glucose levels first.
Right.
Bros do that shit all the time. And insulin's not, and this is just, I can't pound this into your head enough, that insulin is not a more is better type of thing. There is an appropriate amount to use, and that it's really like there's no benefit for using more, really.
Right. More is not better. More can potentially be fatter or like deader.
Or in fact, if you're having to pound a bunch of insulin to deal, like let's say if you're having to take 10, 15, I've heard a guy saying that, well, I had to use 15 units to deal with 100 grams of carbs. I'm like, well then, bro, you're like severely insulin resistant.
Mm-hmm.
You got a bigger problem going on. We need to fix that.
Yep.
That is a bigger issue. So yeah. Anyway, moving on.
Definitely important stuff to keep in mind, though. So I do want to pick your brain a little bit on general PEDs, just based on the fact that we got a bunch of weird shit going on now. So you can't really get Primo or Masteron anywhere. If you can, you got to be kind of careful whether or not you trust it. And now people are really like Equipoise has had this massive rebirth or resurgence in the community. And now there's younger guys that are just like, oh, Equipoise is the greatest thing ever, when we kind of wrote it off a few years ago. How are you navigating this? I saw you recently make a post about the estrogen issues, estrogen being tanked from Equipoise, and then looking into things like Dianabol as a prophylactic because that'll jump estrogen right back up. But how are you navigating these waters of having limited PED use for not yourself because you're not training right now or you're just getting back into it, but for clients and just general selection of PEDs?
Well, it's like 2003 all over again, man. I don't know if you go that far back. I mean, dude, the only thing we had back then, I never heard of anybody running Primo or Masteron in 2003.
Primo was like this holy grail that we were like searching the world for back then. We knew it existed, but it was like a unicorn.
Yeah, and I never heard of Masteron until like the last decade, man. Like I mean, I knew of it, but I'm like, people use that for bodybuilding? I mean, everybody ran back then. It was Test, Equipoise, Deca, D-ball, or Anadrol. That was our cycles.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. So it's back to the old.
So how are you navigating the columns now for people? Because we basically don't have access to DHTs outside of orals.
Yeah, I mean, really, you don't have any choice left but to run EQ, but you have to be very conservative with, not everybody, but I'd say most people need to be very conservative with EQ because it does seem to tank estrogen really bad in a lot of people. I am one such person. I have, if I run a gram of test, I probably can't run more than 300 or 400 EQ before my estrogen gets fucking smashed.
Mm-hmm.
You could, and I think bros, anecdotally, we didn't know what was going on back in the day, but the old cycles used to be, everybody ran. I remember, man, it was like you run test, you run EQ at half your test, you run Deca at half of that, and then you throw 40, 50 milligrams of D-ball in pre-workout, and that's what fucking people did.
Mm-hmm.
And, we had no idea what was going on because we didn't check our blood work back then.
Nope.
There was none of that going on. And so I suspect that probably led guys to have okay estrogen levels. And we just kind of by default work that out. But I would say, you need to pay close attention to your estrogen levels. I've been having guys get an ultra sensitive estradiol test done. My preference is obviously for Masteron or Primo. I would put EQ in kind of that B tier of safety. It's not like running fucking Tren or anything like that, or DHB or Ment. I see guys doing that shit. If I'm going to run a toxic compound, I'm just going to run fucking Tren. I'm not going to mess around with DHB. Let's just be honest. Let's just go to the guy that actually works.
Yep.
And I'm not saying that DHB and Ment don't work, but Tren works better.
Go to the villain that we know.
So if you want to go that route, just fucking run some Tren, man. That is an option too, but for us old guys, like Tren just doesn't doesn't treat me well anymore. I can't do that. I would probably run a really low dose of EQ and run my test higher and run some GH, and that would be for me what I would do. But that's kind of been the approach with clients. And if we need to sprinkle in some orals, we can sprinkle in some orals. I'm not a big fan of orals in the off season unless they're necessary. I've kind of come full circle on D-ball. I put a lot of D-ball hate out a few years ago, but I got in a situation last year where I crashed my estrogen with Aromazin and Equipoise, ironically. And D-ball was my lifesaver. So D-ball and I are friends again.
Mm-hmm. I think there's a lot of application for D-ball based on estrogen because we're seeing all these estrogen-related side effects. Now, I know you've mentioned in the past that you used to respond really well to Nandrolone, and then in recent years, not so much. Is that something that you're seeing that's well-tolerated or less tolerated amongst everybody that you're talking to, working with, peers? Because that one seems to give me the most like mixed signals in terms of talking to people. Some people love it, some people hate it. It's very divisive.
It seems to be age-related from what I've seen. Young guys say that's no problem. Older guys have a lot of problems with it.
Because I recently
And
just put a little bit in. I feel great, but I'm kind of like keeping an eye out. I'm like, let's see for the other side to kind of like rear its
yeah,
head.
it was great for me until it wasn't.
Mhm.
And we know that 19-nors are synthetic progestins, and progestins do weird things to your brain.
Mhm.
Really weird fucking things to your brain. It affects dopamine and serotonin. It's probably a cumulative effect, I would imagine, over a long period of time. Some of it's dose related. There's other things that interplay in dopamine and serotonin regulation. Estrogen levels play a factor in all of that. It seems to be the side effects from Nandrolone get exacerbated when estrogen is high.
Mhm.
High estrogen usually is going to lead to higher progesterone. Higher progesterone and estrogen are going to lead to potentially prolactin issues. Prolactin affects dopamine. So there's all sorts of downstream effects. So I would say just if I were to use it, I would use it conservatively. It seems like a little bit goes a long way.
Mhm.
I'll say this: I don't think anything beats Nandrolone for putting size on. I just don't. At least in my experience, for me, nothing put size on me like Nandrolone did. But it comes with these potential side effects,
Mhm.
and it's something that you have to closely monitor. And maybe the smashed estrogen from Equipoise will allow you to run a little more
It could
Nandrolone.
very well, exactly.
It's
Um,
it's possible, but it seems like a lot of and you'll hear guys like they run Nandrolone alone, and they say, "Well, I don't get any side effects," and it's likely due to the downstream effects of how estrogen affects the progesterone, and estrogen, progesterone, and prolactin all interact with each other. Would be my guess. Once again, I'm not an endocrinologist, but that would be my guess at what's going on. And it also seems to be that Nandrolone does have some effect on testosterone. Nandrolone and mint both, where it seems to upregulate aromatase expression, where you do get more estrogen conversion than you would just running testosterone by itself.
mhm.
And then you add in the progestinic effects and potential prolactin issues, which usually I don't see that often on blood work, but it can happen.
Mhm.
Um, I would say this, like for the bros that love to run caber, I would not run that shit. If you have those sort of problems, you just don't run Angela, and I wouldn't fuck around with the dopamine agonist because you can permanently fuck your mental health up.
Mhm. There's some negative side effects on the heart from caber too, I believe, is there not?
Yeah, there's some negative side effects, and also like I mean, look it up if you want, but dopamine agonist withdrawal syndrome is basically like coming off of heroin.
Mhm.
Um, when you use a dopamine agonist to fix the problems from taking Deca, just don't fucking take Deca.
Yeah, I would say that is probably the smarter course of action. Would you advise somebody that maybe hasn't tried a Nandrolone or anything similar before to maybe start with an NPP so we can at least kind of see what we might be dealing with and have it clear the system
Yeah,
faster?
I talked to Kurt about this extensively. He doesn't think NPP is as slow acting as everybody thinks it is. He said he thinks that it actually stays in your system a lot longer. It doesn't peak as high as Deca, so that's probably why people don't get the side effects from it
Hmm.
that they do from Deca. It does, just anecdotally seem to be gentler.
Right.
Deca is probably more effective, but yeah, I'd say if you're going to dip your toe in the pool, that would be it. And I would only use it as a tertiary compound. I would only use it as my third compound. So if I were going to, I would always have a test base in place because we need some DHT and estrogen conversion. I would probably use a secondary compound that's going to modulate estrogen in our favor, probably lowering estrogen, something like Equipoise or Primo,
Hmm.
which Primo is not available right now. And then if I were going to throw Nandrolone in, I would probably do Nandrolone as a adjunct to those two. So
Hmm.
that way we're mitigating. Or if you were going to run it with testosterone only, you would definitely need to run an aromatase inhibitor, I would assume.
So now with the weird availability of everything in terms of anabolics, and then more people being open to things like your insulins and the really increased availability of GH, do you find that there's a place for any of these other new peptides outside of GLPs, like your mitochondrial stuff? We talked a little bit last time about like the SLUs and whatnot. Do you think those are getting to a point where they're going to be like more prevalent, if not crucial to prep situations or just bodybuilding in general? Or are you still kind of hesitant on really deploying those as major tools?
I used them quite a bit this year on my preps. I did 62 preps this year. Did a lot of preps. And it was interesting. My guys, I ran quite a few. I wouldn't say everybody. Well, they chose. I give people their option. I don't tell them what they have to do. But quite a
Hmm.
few of my guys opted for the metabolic stack, so to speak, the GLP-1 with the MOTS-c and SLU. And it was interesting. People that I've had that really struggled with getting lean before got the leanest they ever have on
Hmm.
that combination.
Awesome.
Uh, and on paper, if you really think about it, like some of the stimulants and stuff that we run, how they affect cardiovascular health, um, maybe the mitochondrial stack is safer long term
Hmm. Hmm.
for cardiovascular health. There was a recent study that came out. I got a video coming out tomorrow. By the time this year's is out, it already been out. But I went through. They did a study on 20,000 IFBB pro bodybuilders and looked at all cause mortality. And the number one cause of death in that pool during a 16-year period of time was cardiovascular events, heart attacks and
Hmm.
strokes, clots.
Yep.
So if anything that we can do to reduce risk in that area, I think would be a benefit to our community.
Now, working with so many people and seeing them utilize this stuff in the past year or so, did you see any kind of reflection of that in blood work? Were people coming back with different numbers or
Better, much
really?
improved, massively improved.
Which ones in particular?
Lipids would be the primary one.
Hmm.
I don't see guys coming out of contest prep with smashed lipids. C-reactive protein
Hmm.
would be better. A1C was better. Liver values were better. I mean, especially when retatrutide the glucagon agonist seems to have some effect on liver health, probably how it affects glucose metabolism.
Hmm.
I would suspect. I don't know, but there does seem to be improvement in liver markers with the glucagon agonist addition. And I have a feeling that a lot of people have dysfunctional mitochondrial health too. Now, there's some people that take these mitochondrial enhancers and say they don't feel anything, they don't notice anything. That and I wonder about this sometimes too. If those people aren't already healthy, have
Right.
healthy mitochondria, whereas the guys that have dysfunctional, most likely the people that were obese, have dysfunctional mitochondria. Seem to notice the fat guys basically.
Yeah.
The fat guys seem to get the most profound effect from these things.
Hmm. But it
The
doesn't mean
guys
they're
that are
not
already
working.
lean
It's weird.
don't.
Yeah. It's
No, like people, I've had a lot of people like, I don't feel anything. It's not like, is this actually working? And then they losing weight faster than they ever have.
Yep, exactly. Like I've never felt SLUPP332 and I've never felt MOTS-c, and I've experimented with both
Nope.
like extensively. I could take it and go to bed. Like I don't feel a thing, but
Well,
every
they
time
aren't
I use it,
stimulants.
exactly. But I'm not getting any sort of like increased endurance, or like I feel like I can do so much, or I'm not getting tired. It literally, I could take it and completely forget about it. But every time I do, my rate of getting leaner, remarkable. Like it's huge improvement across the board.
They seem, I have to give it. I think it was Dr. Dean that was the first one to talk about doing this stuff. I think it was him that postulated this, the mitochondrial stack, so to speak, and everybody needs to send Dean a thank you or $5 donation or something. But he was the one that brought this to the world, and I know he talked about, he thinks the long term effects of it. Now, I don't know that I would run these things year round.
Right.
I do wonder, and I've seen some guys that were running this shit year round, especially MOTS-c and some of these other mitochondrial enhancers, that they're going to lower mTOR and increase in AMPK, which is great for fat burning. But what is it not great for?
Not gaining weight on it.
Yeah, not great for building muscle.
Nope.
So, and it's possible that running anabolics and GH and insulin and all that would overcompensate any negative effect that they have. But I think it runs counter-regulatory to what we're doing in the off season. So I don't know that I would, if you need to lose fat, just dedicate yourself to a fat loss phase.
Yep.
Get it off.
Exactly.
And then go back into your mass phase.
And somebody will comment on the fact that I said that. You can take these things and gain weight, obviously, but you're flipping the switch between mTOR and AMPK, and we want balance. But obviously, in an off-season setting, we're running things like insulin. We're running things like anabolics that are driving that mTOR response.
Yeah.
More in a pre-contest, we want more of an AMPK, but there always has to be balance there. This leads me to my last point. I just want to ask you this question, and this is more kind of advice for really anybody that's kind of navigating these waters of the current settings. We have limited access to some things, better access to other things. And because it seems like everybody and their mother has a peptide code now, because it's so easy to open up a peptide company, these things are not only getting pushed rapidly, but companies are now scrambling to make brand new developments, bigger, better innovations, different peptides that do different things. Every week we're getting something new. How would you suggest that somebody that might be caught up in all of the kind of pomp and circumstance of this, how do you suggest they navigate this? When do we want to look into using something? Obviously, if it's brand new out of the laboratory, we might want to wait and watch a few other people try it first. But do we want to give it a year or two of development? Do we want to do extensive research? Do we want to look into different resources, see how long other people have been taking it? How new is something, or how utilized does something have to be before you're confident saying this probably has some legs to it?
Well, you know how bros are, man. They want to experiment with the latest and greatest.
Exactly.
If you told them drinking Drano would make them rip, they would do it. I take the more cautious approach. Like I was a little skeptical about some of this stuff going into this this contest prep season, and some of my guys were like, "I want to try it." I'm like, "Okay, you want to try it?" My guys that were prepping for national shows, I didn't fuck around. I just used the same tried and true formula that I've used in the past. I will probably change that up next year because I have seen some pretty impressive effects with people. I never like to be the first to dip my toe in the pool. I'd rather take the conservative approach and let some other fool go out and try it first. And see what happens. And then, if they don't grow a third eyeball and they get good results, then I might try it out. I mean, I was late to the growth hormone party. I didn't, really get on growth hormone until 6 or 7 years ago.
I think it's good to take that approach, though. And I've said it so many times before. Like, we all saw Bigger, Stronger, Faster back in whatever it was, 2007, 2008. And the whole tagline to that movie was, and I love that movie, but the whole tagline was, hey, nobody's dying. Show me the bodies. So that affected a lot of us to kind of jump into things maybe a little bit too hardcore. And then about a decade later, the bodies started showing up. So it's like, oh, so you never really want to be the first one to push the limits on anything. Paul, this has been an amazing podcast. Thank you so much for diving so deep into the insulin protocols and whatnot. And I want to especially point that out because I know you're not the insulin guy, but it is something that you're very well known for. And when you give this type of information for free on a podcast, it's not like you're giving away the keys to the kingdom. It's not like you're giving away the secrets. That's not the whole thing with coaching, but it is something it's incredibly valuable, and it's something that you spent a long time mastering. So I can't thank you enough for being able and willing to provide that information to the viewers of the show. For people that want to dive deeper into everything that you're putting out there, can you give them a quick reminder where they can find all of your content, all of your information, and let's knock on wood that it doesn't end up getting like stolen from Instagram and YouTube again because of the algorithm or whatever?
Yeah, hopefully I don't get banned again. Now you can follow me on Anabolic Bodybuilding on YouTube. I also am duplicating everything over to Rumble now just to be safe. I am on Paul K. Barnett on Instagram and Twitter as well. So I have my shit spread across multiple platforms. And if you want to learn more, if you want to do the deep dive, I have my Anabolics e-course that you can get on anabolicbodybuilding.com. And I have my cycle cheat sheet, which is for the bros with the ADHD. It's a 30-page summary of the 60-hour e-course I have. So
Perfect.
if you just want to get to the point, you can go do that. But I basically everything that's in those courses is also on my YouTube channel for free if you want to go through and take the time to watch everything. But
it's always good to have it kind of in your back pocket so you can pull up the reference it. So if Paul's not going to say it, I'm going to say it. Buy the course. Don't be cheap. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been the DDT Method Podcast. Paul, thank you for being back on. Thank you guys for checking it out, and we will see you next time.